Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. There are no unsolvable problems between Athens and Ankara. That's how Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan summed up his meeting with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. The meeting came as both leaders said they were determined to solve decades-long issues while showing strong commitment to their renewed friendship. Prime Minister Mitsotakis acknowledged Turkey's positive contribution to stopping human traffickers as both countries deal with irregular migration over land and in the Aegean Sea. The thaw in relations is expected to also benefit the Turkish minority in Greece's western Thrace, which has been struggling with a series of bans on their schools and mosques. The meeting, their fourth in the last 10 months, comes as the two NATO allies continue to see warming ties after years of tensions. They have included maritime disputes in the Aegean and Mediterranean seas and finding a solution for a divided Cyprus. And for more on the Greek Prime Minister's visit to Ankara, joining me now from Athens is Dimitri Triantafylou. He's a professor at Pantheon University. And from Istanbul, Zuhal Mert Uzuner. She's a professor at Marmara University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Dimitri, what do you make of Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis' visit to Ankara, which came 5 months after Erdoğan's Athens visit?
Well, it went well. It was to be expected. I think that the two leaders have been working on having a good working relationship since they met in Vilnius last July, and since then, they set up a framework for discussions and dialogue between the two countries. The foreign ministers, Hakan Fidan and Yoros Yerapetritis, are also working very well closely with them in setting this framework, as are the deputy ministers on both sides. And this was a visit that sort of was meant to project that, what has happened since Athens and to maintain this spirit of dialogue and cooperation. And I think this was seen from the way that the Greek Prime Minister was received by the Turkish President, to the press conference where they agreed to disagree on certain things, but they agreed on most things, and to the dinner that followed at the end, which, from what I understand, was, the hospitality and the dialogue and the conversation between the two men was very good.
So, Zuhal, what do you think? Some argue that the visit would test Türkiye-Greece friendship initiative relaunched after years of mistrust. How did it go? I mean, did you see any breakthroughs?
Actually, this process is very fresh and it needs to progress more. It is a promising process. Why we say that? Because first of all, now we have a dialogue, and it seems a very sincere and open dialogue. It is an essential part of any kind of progress in international relations. That's why continuation of the dialogue is by itself is very valuable and very important for having any kind of progress. Maybe we don't have very concrete outcome right now, but at least the increasing the dialogue and also rising the economic conducts and much more agreements about maybe much softer areas of activities are very progressive and very positive for bilateral relations.
So, Dimitri, it seems that long-running differences remain over maritime disputes in the Aegean, the Eastern Mediterranean and Cyprus. So how do you think these issues will be addressed moving forward?
Look, I think just like Zuhal mentioned, we are in a trust-building process right now, feeling each other out and actually having a number of agreements. I think behind closed doors, the two delegations discuss these issues, but I don't think the climate is ripe enough to overcome mistrust and to overcome, to figure out what convergences are possible. And that's why they're working on all these other issues, especially the positive agenda and immigration deal and the visit of Turkish citizens to Greek islands and so on. And so, the expectations, at least from the Greek side, the expectations at first were that, this would set up the possibility of figuring out how to resolve bilateral disputes. And now the expectations are more, this was a good meeting, let's continue working on this framework so that we can keep cooperating. And then eventually at some times when the climate is ripe, we will move forward. Trust building takes a lot of time. Right now we're still trying to figure out the framework.
But what kind of confidence building measures could the both sides take now?
Look, more agreements. 3 were announced. You have a new sort of business council. It's between the two sides, and there's momentum. And there's been a lot of momentum since the Athens meeting. We are getting into fire season, summertime for both, and fire season. And so this memorandum that was signed on natural disasters might prove useful, as both sides will, unfortunately, due to climate change, will be facing devastating consequences of climate change. So there's potential for a lot of these things to build up, especially the business aspect. The business sector is progressing. We know that there is dialogue also on the military end. Confidence building measures among the two militaries. Talks have been going well, even though not much information is leaked. And the fact that the two countries are also, it was interesting in this press conference where the two leaders made statements that they discussed issues beyond the Greek-Turkish relations. They talked about the differences that might exist on policy vis-a-vis Gaza, or they talked about other issues. It's also interesting, so there's a mutual recognition that they can discuss other issues as well, and the fact that, remember, as a paradigm, as a model, these are two allied countries living side by side in a region that has its share of problems, Ukraine, Gaza, Syria, Libya, and so on, and have managed during this time to set up some sort of framework for cooperation. And that in itself, I think, is fundamental.
Important. So, Zuhal, as Dimitri mentioned, despite the worsening situation in Gaza and the ongoing war in Ukraine, relations between the two countries have remained on track. The two leaders actually differed on Hamas, as Dimitri just mentioned, but it seems what's happening in Gaza is not impacting their ties. But the question is, will this be the case going forward? And could the war on Ukraine also impact ties between Athens and Ankara if things further escalate in that region?
Actually, it is already have a kind of impact on Greek-Turkish relations. If you remember, the situation was much more tense when we look at the previous era. So the Ukrainian crisis brought two NATO allies together. I think this was one of the most important reasons of this need for decreasing tension in our geography. That's why the Ukrainian crisis is by itself a kind of promoter for pushing both sides to think that it's not time to do these things. Now it's time to keep this dialogue and maybe not progress, but not going more. So the limiting tension is by itself is related with rising tension in our geography. Yes, there are serious problems about the approaches of both countries. They have different the evaluations about Ukrainian crisis and Gaza. So maybe it can be a kind of the barrier in front of making common operations, common, the initiatives, and these are actually good potential cooperation areas, but still there are very important barriers. What I see in this last visit was this actually. The different approaches about international developments are still in front of us, but that doesn't mean that there is no space for cooperation as two NATO member countries. So this is also an important signal for understanding this existing situation about Ukrainian crisis.
So, Dimitri, we've mentioned both countries have agreed to focus on energy, trade, and other cultural issues. But what could Turkey and Greece do to ensure stability in the Eastern Mediterranean now?
Yeah, this is the next big thing. Potentially, they could do a lot. I can think of a number of things. Taking an initiative, both Ankara and Athens, a regional initiative to include cooperation on a number of issues, much like, for example, the BSEC, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, has been doing in the Black Sea. Yes, there's a crisis there. Ukraine and Russia and Georgia and so on do not have relations with each other, but nevertheless, they're motivated. The organization exists. They're motivated by economic interests. And I think in our part of the world, I think there is a possibility, if you look at these soft politic issues, whether it's a cooperation in the areas of trade and energy and tourism and so on, where maybe a regional framework can be created. Because I think, as I said, this bilateral initiative right now between the two countries has the potential, and these are the two leading countries in the region, so that has the potential of bringing together other countries to focus on common issues. Climate change is something that affects everyone the same, never mind whether one has good relations with the other or not. So potentially one could think outside the box and move beyond just the narrow bilateral differences, which, as we know, will take time to resolve, if ever at all. But even if they're not resolved, at least you have frameworks in place which allows you, frameworks that are resilient to whatever tensions might occur, and allows you to create in this joint space with each country maintaining whatever the positions are in this joint space called the Eastern Mediterranean.
All right, Dimitri and Zuhal, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.